I usually say invest in your infrastructure. And that, even for a small organization, that means being intentional about your development work, your fundraising work, blocking time in your calendar every month to, you know, contact donors for updates, to apply, to, submit applications and LOIs, to do the development work and really think critically about how you're approaching it and strategically for your organization.
Welcome to the Imagine Podcast, where we talk about everything your nonprofit or social enterprise is wondering about, from marketing, fundraising, and building your organization's capacity to champion the causes you care about. The Imagine Podcast is brought to you by ImaginePod, a coaching accelerator for women-led social impact organizations. At ImaginePod, our mission is to democratize fundraising and marketing resources for diverse-led nonprofits and social enterprises.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Imagine Podcast. In today's episode, I'm really happy to share that I was able to speak with Helen Bryant, a former colleague of mine who has spent the last decade helping some of our largest national organizations working on social justice causes raise the money that they need to do that work. She has helped raise over $6 million for organizations like the League of Conservation Voters and many others. And now she is a fundraising consultant and has helped many organizations, especially those that are smaller, that don't have a background in building development programs, be able to build those and giving them the insights and strategies that they need to understand how to bring in funding through grants and individual donations at a really large level. So what I did today was ask her some questions specifically around what she thinks is the most important for small organizations that want to be able to attract new donors in their messaging. And then we got to dive into something that's called the theory of change. Some of you may have heard of this before, but it's essentially a framework that's used to help you really be able to articulate the work that you do in the world and the larger impact that you're having, all of which is incredibly important to communicate to potential donors. So she walks through why it's important to have a theory of change, what it is, and how she helps organizations be able to arrive at that and articulate it well across all their messaging. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can develop your own fundraising program, attract great donors for your cause, and build your own theory of change, then take out a pen and a pad and start taking notes. So let's dive in. Enjoy. Hello, Helen Bryant. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to dive into our conversation and learn from you and to get some strategic insights for so many nonprofits in our community that are wanting to fundraise and learn more about how they can do that at any size. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. I'm excited to dive in.
Great. So for our first question, I thought it would be great. We're going to have a chance to look into your career and how you got to where you are today, but let's just start off talking about who are you? What is it that you do?
Sure. Well, currently I'm a fundraising consultant. I focus on organizational development and fundraising and tying the two together. Um, I work with nonprofits and social sector entrepreneurs, advising around strategic planning, building out and strengthening development programs, both new ones and ones that have already been in place and need to be updated, and creating content for funders and donors and various segments and audiences.
Wonderful. So then tell us a little bit about your career. How did you get started and what led you on this path to becoming this fundraising consultant that you are today?
Well, I actually started my career in international education. I developed and implemented international cultural and professional exchange programs for the U.S. Department of State and embassies abroad. And in this role, it was an everything role. I worked every step of the programming process, from idea generation and securing funding to program development and implementation and ultimately evaluation. So this forced me to drill down deeply into every step of the program creation and implementation process. So the role turned out to be an excellent training for my future career and development. And so I just decided to leave programming several years ago and then focus on development because one of my favorite parts of programming was writing and being able to see an idea that you had, you write about it, write well, and you get it funded and you see it come to pass.
So I think it's always fun to also kind of take a step back and look further into people's childhoods and figure out what might they have experienced or maybe kind of developed as strengths, even as young as children, that help them kind of figure out that they wanted to take the career path that they did. What do you think are some of the things that you experienced as a child that has now brought you to where you are?
Well, I come from a long line of writers and activists, and they encouraged me from early on to pursue all of my creative interests, particularly writing and my love of reading and books. They instilled in me a deep commitment to use my talents in service of humanity. That's just an ethic that I grew up with and one that I embrace. And so from an early age, these principles have guided me and consequently sort of led me into my professional career. So in the social sector, I found a home that allowed me to sort of flex my talents while serving my own personal mission.
Wow, that's so interesting and such a wonderful thing that your parents developed that and actually had that culture in your home. So, kind of fast forward to where we are right now, you are helping so many social impact organizations think about how they can bring in the right funding, whether that be grants or individual donations, to be able to do the work that they're doing. And at ImaginePod, we have so many clients, many whom are very small. Some of them literally, they are the founder and the executive director, and they do everything. And they're a one-person team, all the way to smaller nonprofits that have team members, but they're not very large and they don't have a ton of capacity to do a lot of fundraising. They may not even have the budget to bring on a consultant. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the things that you've learned along the way? Some advice that you might give to those types of organizations that really want to learn how they can bring in more funding? What are the things that they can be doing strategically to be able to set themselves up well, to be able to bring in grants or bring in larger donations and build relationships with donors, things like that? What are some of the advice or the counsel that you might give to those types of organizations?
Well, the first thing I usually say, invest in your infrastructure. And that, even for a small organization, that means being intentional about your development work, your fundraising work, blocking time in your calendar every month to contact donors for updates, to apply, to, submit applications and LOIs, to do the development work and really think critically about how you're approaching it and strategically for your organization. The next thing I would say is, especially for smaller and newer nonprofits and organizations and businesses, learn your landscape, learn where you fall within the landscape of what you do, and then learn the landscape of your funders, of your investors, of your philanthropy. Really get to know who's funding your peer organizations or your peer businesses. I look often for funder affinity groups like Grant Makers for Health is one, and they are collectives of funders who, it's just a prospect list waiting for you. And you just kind of work your way through and you know that they're interested in your topic. I also suggest, especially for social entrepreneurs, to read as much as you can, again, about the landscape in your particular niche or particular field. Get to know the amounts, the levels of investment, the frequency. Are they single? Are they multi-year gifts? And just really get a sense of where you fall in the spectrum of your work. And last thing I'll say, I think one of the most important things that every nonprofit social enterprise should be able to do is to tell your story and be able to tell it succinctly and compellingly. It's so important to connect with funders and investors. It helps them understand your mission, vision, but most importantly, the impacts of your work. And they really need to get a sense of that and have a grasp of it before they, of course, will consider investing in your organization. So every stakeholder involved with your organization, from staff to board members and even from the community that you work with, they should be able to say what you do, why you do it, how you do it, and again, most importantly, the impacts of what you do. So again, the last thing I will say, take a step back and focus on telling your story.
I love that. That is actually very important and something that many organizations, like you said, that are smaller or that are newer are still trying to figure out. And oftentimes, maybe not everyone on the team does have that clarity. So I think that that is such helpful advice. And then that brings us into, okay, then how might they figure that out? How do they figure out what their story is? How do they figure out what their impact is? What is the best way for them to be talking about that, articulating that, discovering that? I know that you have spoken with us at ImaginePod about the value of having a theory of change, for example. So I'd love to hear you kind of dive into what that is and how that can help organizations understand how to articulate their impact.
Oh, of course. I am a rare person to say this, but I love theories of change because they are an excellent tool to help you step back and really place yourself in the larger sort of ecosystem of change makers that you're a part of. And so essentially, a theory of change tells a story of your organization's vision for success, why this vision is necessary, how you'll work towards it, and what the world will look like as a result of your work. It's definitely an important opportunity, again, for your organization to step back and really think about and articulate the why behind your work. Those are the basics of creating a theory of change. And so I always say, first thing you do is step back and vision. You really want to take time. I know it's hard to find the time to do this, especially, if you're a smaller or, single business owner or executive director or founder. It's important to take the time to do this. I work with social entrepreneurs that are all about the work and really haven't taken the opportunity to step back and really consider why they're doing this work beyond it needs to be done. And just being able to articulate that. So the one other thing I'll say about theory of changes right now and why they are important, having a strong theory of change is growing more important in the field of philanthropy. Many funders and investors want to see that you have a larger vision for your work beyond outcomes and want to get a sense of how your actual impacts fit into their broader vision for systems change or structural change. So being prepared with a good theory of change, it not only helps guide your organization and your work, but it also helps in your fundraising. It helps you connect with donors and investors.
That's so wonderful to hear. I think there are so many organizations that feel like, well, when I connect with people, I do tell them those things and I'm really passionate. There are so many people who are great in person or connecting one on one to share why they got into what they're doing and why the work's important. But like you said, they haven't taken the time to now actually put this together, to have the
Yeah.
materials, have it on their website, to have almost like that elevator pitch where they understand every time
Yeah.
this is how we say it. And we've done the research to know what is the ultimate impact in the wider world when we've accomplished what we're working towards. And I think that's something that's really important to get that clarity and to understand how important it is that it can't just be bottled up inside of you. It needs to be in all your materials. It needs to be on your website. Your team needs to know it, et cetera. And ultimately, that is what funders are trying to understand. So then I'd love to know then, how might a consultant like you be able to help nonprofits be able to figure that out? What does it look like to work with someone like you on that?
So when I do work on my clients with this, we usually start the process from the end, your outcomes and impacts, and then work our way back to the beginning, our mission and vision. So I usually start with, okay, these are the outcomes we want to see, and then think about the why. And I think you mentioned this, it's important to have, an evidence-backed explanation of what the world would look like. And when I say evidence-backed, I mean everything from research to feedback from your constituents to, other organizations' impacts and outputs that fall within your sort of field, really having something to back up why your impacts will help the world. And so I always suggest building a TOC, a theory of change, by looking at your outcomes, like I said, and thinking about how they feed into your goal. How do these outcomes support progress towards your goals? Then take another step back and consider how your goals feed into your larger vision of change. And then being able to clearly articulate the process of how your interventions leads to this vision and this change. So that's really simplified. A theory of change can be everything from an infographic to a 10-page concept note to, a elevator pitch. So I find them very interesting and very useful tools. I love seeing clients come up with their own theories of change and kind of have that aha moment. This is why I'm doing this in the larger picture. So yeah, I love working on theories of change.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think that that is so helpful. I think oftentimes we do need someone to help walk us through the process, maybe have some frameworks, exercises, things we can do. It's sometimes surprising to me how many organizations, they really don't even know what their goals are. They don't have a clear, really measurable and very realistic goal that they want to achieve, or they don't really understand what are good goals to have. And they do need a sounding board. They need to collaborate with their team members. They need to do research. And so I think the value of having a consultant come in is really having that person that has the structure to help you be able to get to those answers effectively. So you're not just trying to put it all together and maybe it's a little disorganized and overwhelming. Because like you said, just finding the time in and of itself is so challenging for especially smaller teams. So it's good to have someone that you know is going to help you get to your destination. You're going to have those goals, really have a strong vision, really understand your research, understand the landscape, and then have that articulated theory of change at the end. And that's something at ImaginePod that we talk about often, that it's really important to invest in training. It's important to invest in coaching. This is one of the things that we do, so that you have someone who's not just giving you information, but then also helping you understand what is it that you need to get done, holding you accountable, giving you some dates and deadlines, helping you through whatever the blocks might be, many of which are really mindset blocks. So it's really important to have that. Hey there, you need more donors, members, and supporters so you can change the world. But you probably feel like you don't have the time, money, or enough team members to actually do that, right? That's where we come in. We are ImaginePod, a marketing accelerator for social impact teams like yours that coaches you through the process of building donor and customer loyalty without burnout. Because we use all the fun and innovative methods for helping you learn how to grow, like give you accountability and office hour sessions so you have the space to implement the things you're learning built right into our accelerator program, as well as access to a mastermind group with peer-to-peer learning with aligned social impact leaders from around the world across sectors, causes, and even continents. And we ditched all the traditional stuff that just doesn't work well for small and under-resourced teams, like boring seminars with long slide deck presentations or 80-page strategy documents, for example. Plus, we're on a mission to democratize marketing and fundraising resources with an intentional focus on women and BIPOC-led and serving organizations, which is just one of the reasons why we donate a percentage of the profits from this accelerator program to support their causes. So are you one of those leaders? Then you're our people. Why don't you go ahead and hop on a call with us? We'd love to meet you and help you change the world. Talk soon. My next question for you then is, there might be some organizations that are listening to this and they're thinking, well, that all sounds great. And definitely one day I'm going to do it. But what would you maybe tell them in terms of how do they know now that they're ready to invest in either training or getting access to some time like yours? You're going to be generously giving a lot of your time to people in our upcoming course and helping some people in our community. And so that's really exciting. But how does an organization know, okay, now is the time for me to now partner with a consultant and to really get access to their time to walk through this process with them? How do they know when they're ready for that?
That's a great question because there are multiple points, I think, along the process, whether it's establishing your organization or your business, or it's overhauling it, you know, wanting to completely maybe change direction or update your services or reconsider your impacts. So, what I would say is it really depends on, of course, where your organization is. One of the things I would say, and I used to advise my very small community-based clients that literally just had an idea and had been doing the work before not under the auspices of a 501(c), but just doing the work in the community. And so, I like to say, have your idea. I think it's important to have some experience behind you so if possible, so you have a good sense of what your work, what the impacts are, how does it work, what does it look like in practice. But if even without that, I tell my early clients to reach out. Well, they reach out to me for help, usually around the time when they say developed a budget, have some general goals in mind or outcomes in mind, if not goals, and are really passionate about the work, but just aren't sure how to move forward into formalizing it into a structured organization or business. And so I think at that point, it's great to reach out for a consultant or for help or support. And I think also another point is if you're up and running, but you realize that it could run a lot more smoothly and you're having trouble pinpointing those pain points that are keeping you from the level of work that you want to do, the level of, I guess, sort of organization. Again, like you want your work to run smoothly. And so I think that's another good point to reach out to a consultant for support. And the last thing I'll say is grant writing. I think that's a big task that for smaller organizations and newer organizations that either haven't done it much before or, either way, they just don't have the capacity to turn in the 5 grants they need to turn in this month to possibly meet their financial goals for the year. And so I would also suggest reaching out for firms, reaching out to either consultants that specialize in grant writing, or what I highly suggest are consultants that can do all of that, that can do the strategic planning with you and the budget development and the developing your fundraising program and aligning them with your organization's strategic goals. Ultimately, I do think that at the end of the day, the consultant that kind of covers the spectrum of development and fundraising and definitely has that skill as a grant writer is important.
Absolutely. And so I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the outcomes that you've helped clients achieve where having that theory of change, partnering with you to really get clear on how you're going to, reach out to funders or individual donors and how you're going to be able to put those materials together? What are some of the things that you have seen as success stories where they worked with you and then they were able to get some amazing outcomes from their investment and their time working on all of those things?
One immediately pops to mind because it's been one of the success stories I'm most proud of. One of my earliest clients, and I still work with them, is a small grassroots political organizing group that focuses on organizing communities in Durham around a progressive agenda. And so with this organization, they brought me in, again, one of those points of bringing a consultant, when they changed executive directors. The organization kind of was going into a new direction, had new leadership, and wanted to redefine their programmatic goals, financial goals. And so I worked with the new executive director who didn't really have a lot of development experience. He was an organizer, excellent organizer, but just didn't have the development experience necessary to run the organization. And so they were referred to me, and I worked with that executive director, teaching him everything about development from soup to nuts. So just starting from the beginning and working our way towards getting grants. The biggest thing I advised him around was, again, the storytelling and telling that story for a funder audience as opposed to a general audience, which is a very different tone and different sort of cadence than you would use with, I guess, your general membership. And so just through setting up a calendar of, funder touches, of funder outreach points that he would do every month faithfully, to revising our template proposal language, to putting out a prospect list, a robust prospect list. And we were able to convert several funders from that prospect list into actual funders. And so through all of that work, we were able to increase their fundraising 141% between 2021 and 2022. And that to me just really speaks to the importance of, staying on like funder communication, clarity in describing your work and your mission, and commitment to funders. We call it stewardship and cultivation. So that's what I would say is I've seen it work. I've done the same thing for another client at a major university who was launching a research program into an actual independent 501(c). And that was the same thing, sort of starting from the beginning and creating prospect lists, coaching them through how to contact and interact with donors. And they were able to launch as an independent organization in November of 2022. I think those are sort of my favorite client success stories to share because it really shows the importance and the power of knowing how to tell your story, as well as knowing your landscape and where to look for support, for funding and investments.
Wow, those really do make it clear that it's very important to do that work, to invest in that. And I loved also seeing how you talked about the moments when they brought in a consultant and really understood the importance of getting that right. That's so exciting to hear. So, how can other organizations that are listening to this get in touch with you? What should they do so that they can start talking with you and potentially get some help from you?
There are a couple of ways. The first way is actually through my LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is the best way to get a hold of me. You also see my background, of course, everything LinkedIn has to offer. The other way would be just to email me. And my address is hbryant, Bryant, Dennis, Dennis, @gmail.com. Those are the two ways you're guaranteed to get me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is really great to learn. And I think that for those who are maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by what do we do to bring in more money, especially in 2023, as the funding landscape is still, people are still trying to figure things out. There's so many things happening in the economy. I hope that this gives you some strategic ideas, and I hope that it gives you a starting point for what you should be focusing on and who might be able to help you and support you during this time. So thank you so much, Helen Bryant.
At ImaginePod, our mission is to democratize fundraising and marketing resources for diverse-led nonprofits and social enterprises. In order to do this, we provide coaching, peer-to-peer learning, courses, and a network of consultants to help you effectively bring in more money and support so that you can increase your programming and impact more lives. We've built a strong community of women-led teams leading the way for traditionally underserved causes and communities from around the world across sectors, causes, and even continents. If you're looking for coaching, training, and a support network to help you build your mission, then reach out to us at hello@imaginepod.com to set up a consultation.